Pledge allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Claire, would you call the roll, please?
Sure. Wolf?
Yes.
Ewan?
Yes.
Gonzalez?
Here.
Cook?
Here.
Kibble?
Here.
Is that everyone?
Good, thank you. All right. Is there any conflict of any of the board members with respect to the proceedings tonight? Seeing none, we'll move to the approval of the agenda.
Make a motion to approve the agenda?
I will second that.
All right, motion made by John, seconded by Rod to approve the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Approval of the minutes of the 12/5 meeting.
I think there's a, first line, we call meeting to order, it should read, you called the meeting on December 5th, 2002, not October 11th, I believe.
Okay, you're right. I have one comment at the very end. Either some words were added or left out under number 8. Upcoming meeting dates, said Taylor said that TC Water Sports would be coming before the ZBA again and will. Is there something we're missing there, or does that need to be?
I'll leave it at that.
So just be, again, period, right? Strike and will?
Yes.
Anything else?
Make a
Okay.
motion that the minutes be approved as amended?
Support.
Moved by John and supported by Matt to approve the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right, let's see now. It is right now about 6:37, and we will open for public comment for any issue not on the agenda.
If I may,
Please come up and introduce yourself.
Good evening. My name is Lauren Teichner. I'm representing Port Traverse condominium residents tonight. I have a comment that is separate from my presentation that is allotted for later this evening.
Okay?
So we are as prepared as we can be on short notice, but we just received Mr. Zayas' lengthy submission that was about 100-plus pages yesterday evening at about 6:20 p.m. And I wanted to make a comment that I believe that there are rules in place for a reason. We abided by those rules ourselves by submitting our packet by December 5th, so that all of you could review it, so that the other side would have a chance to review it. And in light of just the voluminous submission made by the other side tonight, we were in touch with the township today requesting that we adjourn tonight's hearing so that we would have a chance to review it in full and be able to digest it and have a response, or be given extra time tonight so that we could respond and rebut any arguments that we've recently been made aware of. But we were denied those requests, so I just wanted to make an objection about that on the record, and also leave that to all of you to consider potentially adjourning tonight or giving us some additional time. So thank you.
Thank you. Peter?
It's up to you whether you wish to give any party speaking additional time, but this is a remand, and, you know, it's a remand, and we're going to talk about that in a moment here. It's a de novo review, meaning you're looking looking at this all over again as if it was fresh before you. And so you have one applicant who's applying to counter the decision made by the zoning administrator, and everybody else is basically members of the public, technically, including TC Water Sports. Everybody, the townships provide them as a courtesy to allow their attorney to largely speak for 15 minutes just because it consolidates type of public comment. But ultimately, you folks control your agenda if you want to give any party any extra time. And secondly, we may not end up making a decision. The board may not end up making a decision tonight. It may deliberate and end up making a decision at the January meeting. And if that's the case, and that's up to the board, the record could also be open for any additional submittals, although I do recommend a cutoff date, probably not much more than a week after tonight's hearing, so that we have a closed record, and then the board has everything before it when it makes its final decision, if it chooses to do so in January. Of course, if you choose to make your decision tonight and you feel you have sufficient information, that's your prerogative, and as the chair, you control the amount of time allotted to anybody to speak.
Okay, thank you. Any thoughts, opinions?
See how it goes. We decide at a later date, we don't have to decide right now, do we?
Just on this, you can decide later and during the meeting about how, speaking times and things of that nature, but it's good to start off with the rubric, and I think staff has done a pretty good job of putting that together for you.
I personally did not have time to read an additional 100-plus pages prior to this evening.
Do we have a formal policy on packet information and cutoff dates?
Regarding statutory requirement for it to be in by a certain time,
Maybe not statutory, but even like an East Bay Township?
we have a running, I guess, policy or practice that we try to have them, everything in so that we can have the packets out at least a week ahead of time before the meeting.
The problem is when you have a public hearing, whether it's before the ZBA or the Planning Commission, members of the public have a right to not only speak and provide additional information, but they often bring in documents that are presented during the meeting. So it's not that unusual for a board to receive additional materials right up to and including during any type of meeting. That's why I generally make the recommendation that, hey, if it's too much to read and you want extra time, it's the board's prerogative to decide that it wishes to have extra time, but then to say, all right, we have some additional questions, but all material should be in by X date, well before the following meeting when deliberations are continuing and when an ultimate decision may be made, so that you're not bombarded with any more materials after a certain point. So frankly, but if you're going to make this decision at the January meeting, you could say, for example, that we've received everything tonight, and either A, the record is closed as of the end of this meeting, but we're going to deliberate further in January, if we started deliberations tonight, or some other time into the future, but well before you receive your next packet for your January meeting, whatever you decide to do. But that way you don't run into that issue, ultimately in the January meeting. That's the nature of public hearings. Stuff comes in, people hand things out, you get presentations.
Sure.
That's just the way it goes. And you can't stop that. You can't say, I'm sorry, even if it was a regular member of the public who wanted to drop off a bunch of documents, you can't say no, until after the public hearing. That's the first time you can really close your record up completely.
Just for the record, I was in the right place at the right time when this came in. So this is the size of the document that we received. I'm a little uncomfortable with this document if nobody has been able to review it and have sufficient time to see what's in there and at the same time. But at the same issue, I certainly would like to move on this matter. But I'm open to the board, how they feel, if they're comfortable moving forward with not having, let's say, sufficient time to look at this material. I think you'd mentioned that you were uncomfortable about that, correct?
I wanted full disclosure that I did not have adequate time to review the document prior to the meeting.
I spent 4 hours this afternoon reading it. It's a long
Okay.
up there.
No, I didn't get a chance to get through it.
I got through some of it, but not the whole thing in its entirety.
Okay.
Hey, Paul?
I was going to, one thing, and then we'll come right there. As an alternative to this, since we're going to have presentations this evening from both the attorneys, with you being in the lead with the Traverse City first, maybe what we can do is give you some extra time after their presentation to rebut if you wanted to, as an alternative to going forward tonight. Sorry, Preston, go ahead, please.
No, that's okay. I was just going to give you, from a staff's perspective, that we would, I would like to see that we continue with the meeting and hear both presentations and have public hearing. That's what I, at minimum, would like to see happen tonight, but also with respect to those that have not been able to digest everything that came in towards the end, and I get that.
Okay. With no objection, then, is it the board's pleasure to proceed tonight with presentations and public comment, and then with the addition of granting to the Port Traverse some additional time to refute or to rebut the presentation?
I'm perfectly fine with hearing both sides, but hearing the additional time before I have time to digest it myself, I feel like it's a little biased.
Okay. And by the way, we don't have to make a decision tonight.
But if you want to allow extra time, I'm fine with that. It's just hard for me to be able to see both sides if I haven't had a chance to view the document and hear the rebuttal
Okay.
first.
Well,
If
then,
that makes sense.
yes, sir.
Yeah, and that's why my recommendation, to solve that problem when you have documents that are presented to you, all of a sudden, that, like you've had in this case for a public hearing, is that you can still do the public hearing, you can still hear the parties, but you can wait till the next meeting, to make your decision, which will allow board members time to read all of the documents and say, all right, the record's done, we're just going to make sure we read everything and then come back and continue deliberations and go from there. It's not it's nice to get things done in one night, but sometimes that's not possible. This may be one of those situations.
Right. Well, I think we're going to proceed. Okay?
I agree.
Okay. All right. Is there anybody else for the public hearing? Okay, we'll close that at about 6:45 and move forward. Correspondence, is there any correspondence? I think we have it.
You do.
Okay. Okay. All right, that being said, we'll go to the business before the board. The first item is a resolution of the meeting dates for 2023.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
I have a conflict with 4 meeting dates that may require the alternate or a change to date, whatever the board decides.
okay. What date again, I'm sorry?
I have a conflict with May 9th, July 11th, September 12th, and November 14th. Those also fall on other scheduled meetings I have for my job.
Okay. Any other? Okay. Claire, I'm going to bounce this one to you. Is there something we can do as far as different dates at this point, or do you want to?
Yeah, so those are all, the regular meetings are the second Tuesday. Is that, remind me, does Acme Township meet the second Tuesday?
So they moved normally they're the first Tuesday, but when there's a conflict, they move it to the second Tuesday, so that's
Okay.
why those are
Okay,
changed
so there's
to
4
those
of them that
dates.
got moved to the second Tuesday. I guess that would be the board's decision. You do have an alternate. I think best practice would be for if an alternate, whoever starts an issue should finish the issue. So if, if your alternate plugs in to fill Lindsay's space and the issue transcends to the next meeting, then you would want the alternate to, so it could result in the alternate, attending maybe,
Okay.
many of the meetings. And I'll also mention that, there's a lot of months that we don't have a meeting. So I think, we probably average 5 meetings a year. So it might not be as many conflicts as it sounds like, but.
Say November 14th is probably going to be a conflict with me also. So that'll-
Deer hunting? No.
Ah, come on. Okay. All right, with those things in mind, if there's no objection to the dates, then aside from the comments made, why don't we go ahead and take a motion on the dates?
Make a motion to approve the dates for next year's meetings as presented.
Is there-
Well, support.
Okay, moved by John, supported by Rod to accept the dates as presented. We'll take a roll call vote.
Okay. Gonzalez,
Yes.
Kivel,
Yes.
Cook,
Yes.
Ewan,
Yes,
Wolf.
Yes.
Okay. All right, the next item is Appeal 922, which is the Port Travis Condominium Association, public hearing, discussion, and possible action. This deals with Appeal Request 922, Kevin Miller, owner of a parcel of land commonly known as Port Traverse Condominium Association in the Regional Business District. The zoning administrator issued an administrative decision on August 18th, 2021, allowing TC Water Sports to operate as an accessory use for Section 221 of the East Bay Township zoning ordinance at the Sugar Beach Hotel at 1773 U.S. South, Traverse City. This matter is being reheard due to a remand order by the 13th District Court. The matter was previously heard by the Zoning Board of Appeals prior to remand on October 12th, 2021, and December 14th, 2021. On December 14th, 2021, the ZBA determined that TC Water Sports was not an accessory use and therefore had to go through the plan review in order to operate. Per the order by the 13th District Court, the ZBA will be re-examining this determination de novo. Okay. And with that, Peter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for giving me an opportunity. I don't want to take up too much of your time because I first want to apologize for taking up your time here to begin with, because when you're a judge and you wear the black robe, you are always right, no matter what, which means I was wrong. And I was wrong in the sense that the court determined that the findings of fact adopted by the ZBA last December were not sufficient for him to make a final determination on appeal of whether the ZBA's decision was correct or not. And I've apologized to opposing counsel on both sides, not opposing, the appellant and the appellee's counsel, Mr. Bizdock, as well as Mr. Zayas, when that ruling came out. And one of the items that Judge Elsenheimer wished to have more detail on has to do with the two-pronged nature of the review of the decision. And that has to do with the first prong being Section 221, 1 and 2, which talks about what an accessory use is. And then really the second major prong has to do with Section 221, 2C. 2A and B and C are supposed to be tools for the ZBA to use and for the zoning administrator to use to determine what an accessory use is. A and B provide some guidance, although A is pretty much the same as what Section 1 states under 221. B, a little bit more information, but C is really more of a mandated standard. It's not a determination. It basically says you shall, the standard is an accessory you shall not generate any effects on neighboring properties, including but not limited to noise, parking, traffic, glare, or dust greater than or more burdensome than such impacts from the main use on the property. So even if the ZBA determines that it's an accessory use, if the use exceeds that standard, based upon your determination and the evidence on the record, then the use is still forbidden. And there was not a lot of information on the record, the court determined, particularly on that front. And the court noted there really are no standards under 2C either to assist the ZBA in making that determination, so you have to make it based upon the standard itself and the evidence that you have before you. This time around, last time I had drafted findings of fact, sample ones, examples which could be used, proposed findings of fact. You are free to use the ones I've drafted again, which are a little more extensive, but it's important that we can't wipe too much away as far as findings. We have to make sufficient findings for the court, both on the Section 1 portion of the definition and determining whether it is an accessory use, as well as most importantly, or more importantly, maybe the same, I guess, importance, 2C. What has changed, though, are a couple of items. Number one, we have a little more information than we had at the past hearing regarding uses from other businesses and properties within the zoning district there. And one of the parties, or both parties, have provided some additional information on that, but some of that was obtained by staff. There are also, and Clary can help me with this a little bit, passed resolutions involving bottomland leases that the township passed approximately 20 years ago, which I believe Mr. Zaya is in his packet produced, but I don't think that the township actually had those in their records.
Correct. Yeah, there was one from 2003 for,
And I know that the township at that time had, a different leadership, and there was some turmoil, at that time, and maybe that was the reason that somehow that record's not there, but it was found, and it is, a township resolution related to a bottomlands lease for dockage space as well. The other item is the case of Township of Fraser versus Haney has been reversed by the Michigan Supreme Court. In that case, originally determined that you can't look back beyond 6 years. If you haven't enforced your zoning ordinance for a violation that was ongoing, 6 years ago, it basically treated as a lawful non-conforming use and you had to keep it. That case has been eliminated, so we don't have to worry about that issue. You can look at this strictly based upon whether it's an accessory use and not on any specific timeline other than the history of the property, the timeline of usage as it applies to 2B, and whether at this point it generates any effects on neighboring properties, including not limited to noise, parking, etc. So that's the only history that's relevant to that, is up to including today's use, but there's no statute of limitations or anything of that nature. So it's strictly accessory use. Is it one? And if it is or isn't one, would the use in any event generate the effects under Section 2C? So you really need to have both of those clear-cut findings, and you have some samples in the findings of fact, and of course have additional material to review, that some of which was recently submitted.
Does anybody have any questions for Peter? Okay, not this time, but we may come back.
I'm sure we will.
All right. So with that, we do have some presentations that are going to be made this evening, I believe, with respect to the issue. Following that is going to be the public comment that will be heard if anybody does have public comment. The only thing I do have to say is, because we do have a number of people here, we need to adhere to the time limit that we have established for public comment, which is 3 minutes per person. So that being the case, and as said, why don't we lead off with the attorney for the Port Traverse. Excuse me. You have 15 minutes on this one.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Is that like help, guys?
Yes.
That's fine, thanks.
Great. May I?
Yep.
Good evening, my name is Lauren Teichner. I am here representing Port Traverse's residents. And I just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to all of you tonight. Many of Port Traverse's residents wanted to be here tonight.
I'm sorry, could you please stand closer to the microphone?
Many of Port Traverse's residents wanted to be here tonight, but many are sick or snowbirds who are gone for the season, but have submitted public comments. We do have a few residents here tonight in the audience. We are here because TC Watersports has not been a good neighbor to Port Traverse. We're not asking that TC Watersports not be allowed to operate. We're just asking you, the ZBA, to help them be a good neighbor by finding that they are not an accessory use to the Sugar Beach Hotel. We understand that the tourist industry in northern Michigan is what keeps it thriving, but there has to be a symbiotic relationship with residents. Just because TC Watersports is a business doesn't mean that it gets to be a bad neighbor. TC Watersports is a standalone business that has significant adverse impacts on Port Traverse residents, and for both of these reasons, it does not qualify as an accessory use to the Sugar Beach Hotel under the East Bay Township zoning ordinance. And we'll get into all of this. I just want to say there's a balance in life. We know that you can find a balance here. We think the balance here is finding that TC Watersports is not an accessory use to the hotel, which would require that they go through the same permitting process as all other standalone businesses. TC Watersports has actually already done that. A new fact for this rehearing is that it's already had its site plan approval from the township, from the Planning Commission in June 2022. This site plan approval is, again, a material new fact for you as the ZBA to consider. TC Watersports has all of its necessary permits already. It can operate in the 2023 summer season. It can continue with the restrictions on its use that come from that site plan approval. On the other hand, if you find that TC Watersports is an accessory use, that's like handing it a blank check. It will have free rein to operate however it wants as a bad neighbor without any restrictions. We understand how overwhelming the history must be. The packet, it started out at 674 pages. It's now 799 pages and contains a lot of complicated history. So let's make this simple. Here's the bottom line as we see it. In this rehearing, we're asking you, the ZBA, to simply make the same finding as your previous decision in December 2021, that it is not an accessory use, but we also ask you, as Mr. Welding suggested, to record additional findings of fact to fully support that decision, as that's what the circuit court requested that you do when it sent the case back to you. There is a lot of material here, but we don't think it's that complicated. TC Watersports is plainly not an accessory use, as you decided previously. Port Traverse is a community of 36 residential condominiums that were constructed in the 1970s, long before the Sugar Beach Hotel was built in 1995. These condos cannot be rented for less than a year, and as a result are occupied by long-term owners who live and vote in East Bay Township. And many of the residents also predate the huge expansion of TC Watersports' boat rental operations there. The Port Traverse owners have approximately 335 feet of pristine beachfront, and the Sugar Beach Hotel sits directly to the east. TC Watersports, which I'm going to call TCW from here on out, just to save some words, is not an accessory use to this hotel under the zoning ordinance, and so let's look at the zoning ordinance to explain why. Section 221 subsection 1 of the zoning ordinance describes that whenever an activity is conducted in conjunction with another principal use, so here, the hotel, and that activity constitutes only an incidental or insubstantial part of the total activity that takes place, or is commonly associated with the principal use and integrally related to it, then that activity may be regarded as an accessory use to the principal use and can be carried on underneath the permits of the principal use. The zoning ordinance also gives this further guidance for interpreting accessory uses, and that's 221, section 221, subsection 2C. An accessory use shall not, which is mandatory, generate any effects on neighboring properties, including but not limited to noise, parking, traffic, glare, or dust greater than or more burdensome than the impacts from the main use on the property. So here, the principal use is definitely the hotel. And in other circumstances, we understand that generally speaking, water sports at a hotel could be seen as incidental and could be considered commonly associated with a hotel, but not TCW, not here. And that's because TCW is so much more than simply just water sports at a hotel. It has much farther reaching and more burdensome impacts than that, so let me explain about those. First, TCW is not an accessory use to the hotel under the ZO because it is a growing standalone business. Watercraft rentals began in 2007 with the Eagle permit that the hotel had, which allowed for 4 boats and 4 jet skis at that time. TCW began operating in 2014, relying on that 2007 permit. TCW's commercial operations have grown substantially from those small beginnings. It has significantly expanded to a whole fleet of motorized watercraft and other recreational equipment, up to 10 motorboats and 14 jet skis in 2021 when we first brought our appeal. You can see for yourselves as I go through the next few slides just how much TC Watersports has grown over time, and these pictures are the clearest evidence we have. There are also aerial views that you can also see of the expansion that are in our memo that we submitted to the ZBA. TCW is now one of, if not the largest, commercial water sport rental operations on East Bay. It has on-site desks and advertising at multiple locations. Historically, it has moored boats at other locations and then brings them over and rents them at the Sugar Beach Hotel. And it advertises to the general public. Anyone can book on its website. Customers don't need to be and often are not guests of the hotel. As a result, 500 or more people visit TC Watersports every day during the May to September season, which makes sense when you think about the math. 10 motorboats that seat anywhere from 9 to 16 people, as TCW explains on their website. These are rented out 5 to 6 times a day. And add to that 14 jet skis, which seat 1 to 2 people, and those are similarly rented out 5 to 6 times per day. TC Watersports is no longer merely incidental to the hotel. Instead, it is a significant standalone commercial enterprise. So TCW clearly does not meet that requirement for accessory use. But more importantly, and the reason that we're here, is because TCW is not an accessory use because it has these significant adverse impacts on the neighboring Port Traverse condominiums that go well beyond the impacts of the operation of the hotel as a hotel. This also violates the terms of the zoning ordinance. Port Traverse residents have suffered greatly from the irresponsible and unneighborly ways in which TCW operates. These impact Port Traverse residents by creating noise, trespass, and odor and fire safety concerns, and so let's talk about each one of those. First, noise generated by internal combustion engines in TCW's boats and jet skis throughout the day far exceeds the noise from the hotel operating as a hotel. During the summer's busiest times, all of TCW's rental fleet, which is up to 24 engines, are used all day from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. sometimes. The noise results not only from these engines, but also from the hundreds of customers that are using the watercrafts, who also often play music at loud volumes. Additionally, TCW's rental kiosk is on the property line with Port Traverse, which leads to a constant stream of customers lining up just feet away from the closest condominium, and that also increases noise levels. Further, customers and staff are frequently yelling along the property line as they wait to sign up for their watercraft rentals. This is just not being a good neighbor. And it is far more noisy than Sugar Beach Hotel would be if it were solely operating as a hotel, particularly since any noises from the hotel would not be at that level and would not be in such close proximity to Port Traverse condominiums. Trespass. TCW advertises at several locations near Port Traverse and encourages its guests to walk on the beach to Sugar Beach Hotel to rent watercraft, so customers frequently trespass across Port Traverse's property from these other locations to reach the rental dock. This is also not being a good neighbor. And these trespasses would not occur if Sugar Beach Hotel were operating solely as a hotel, where guests would remain on the hotel property. Lastly, and most egregious, we think, is that there are odor and fire safety issues generated by TCW's improper handling, storage, and transportation of large amounts of gasoline, as well as spillage of that gasoline in Port Traverse's nearshore waters. More specifically, TCW has caused, on more than one occasion, gasoline to be released in these waters. TCW staff try to remedy these spills by pouring dish soap in the water. They leave fuel nozzles dangling in the water, as you can see. There are strong fumes from these spills, and residents are unable to swim when gasoline is present in the water. As recently as this past summer, TCW staff has filled unmarked portable gas containers, transported them in unmarked trailers. Once at the hotel property, they transport these delicate gasoline containers down a narrow pathway between the hotel and Port Traverse that's littered with debris, as you can see. This is just incredibly unsafe all around. This is also not being a good neighbor. Overall, the improper transportation and storage of hundreds of gallons of gasoline on a daily basis so close to Port Traverse is clearly more burdensome and dangerous for Port Traverse than any impacts from the hotel operating solely as a hotel. This hotel does not use gasoline like this as part of its operations, and these unsafe conditions would simply not be present. The language that you have seen in the zoning ordinance from 221 subsection 2 subsection C, that an accessory use shall not generate such effects on neighboring properties that are more burdensome than the impact of the principal use, that is not discretionary language. And for these reasons, TCW's activities plainly do not meet the ZO's requirements for defining an accessory use. So we know that the township attorney has already crafted draft findings of fact for all of you for this hearing. If you find in our favor, we have a few additional findings of fact regarding these adverse impacts in particular and how they are more burdensome than Sugar Beach Hotel operating specifically as a hotel that we're asking you to add, which I've provided to you on the larger piece of paper with yellow and black highlights. Those are essentially the same as the proposed findings of fact we made in our submission packet, with just a few added words that we think make it even stronger for findings of fact and make it bulletproof for any circuit court appeal. So how did we get here? We laid out the history of this whole past in our detailed memo to you that we submitted last week. But the long and short of it is that we appealed the zoning administrator's finding from 2021 that TCW is an accessory use. You, the ZBA, found in December 2021 that it's actually not an accessory use. TCW appealed that decision to circuit court, and that judge remanded the case back to you. It's important to note that the circuit court judge did not disagree with your findings, but simply asked for more information to substantiate your decision so it could be evaluated properly. In the meantime, TCW appealed to the Planning Commission for a special use permit for its business, which the Planning Commission then approved in June of this year. And then TCW continued to pursue this appeal. So let's talk about what's at stake for Port Traverse here and the different possible outcomes. If you find in TCW's favor that it is an accessory use, then it can operate however it wants without restriction. It will be unregulated. We believe that TCW is still pursuing this hearing and this appeal because it's hoping to renege on what promises it made to the Planning Commission when it sought its site plan approval earlier this year. We believe that TCW would rather operate as an unregulated accessory use than abide by the conditions that TCW itself voluntarily offered to the Planning Commission in order to gain site plan approval. These conditions, as you can see here, involve 12 jet skis, 9 boats, 1 for rescue, signage requirements, and approved fuel trailer storage, removing their rental hut from Port Traverse's property line, and no more rentals brought in from other locations. If you find that TCW is not an accessory use, that simply means that they will continue to operate, but they will be bound to the conditions of the site plan approval that they received. The conditions protect the neighboring Port Traverse residents from negative impacts by returning the business to a reasonable scale and layout. We did not appeal the Planning Commission approval. We're not objecting to them operating under those terms. With this site plan permit, there's still a substantial operation, but they are a regulated operation. Lastly, if you find in favor of TCW that it is an accessory use to the hotel, we're asking that you impose conditions on that accessory use so that you aren't just handing them a blank check to act however they want. We believe that they should be limited to a number of watercraft that is as an accessory use, if that is what you find, although we don't believe you should find that, but that they should be limited to a number that's below what the Planning Commission imposed. We believe that they should be limited in that circumstance to 6 boats and 5 jet skis, which is what they had in 2015, 2016. That was when the township first started receiving complaints from Port Traverse residents about the impacts of the business. There's an exhibit, I believe it's Exhibit I, to our memo that is an email from Kevin Miller to East Bay Township from 2016. We also believe that TCW should be required to eliminate, as an accessory use, to eliminate or move the rental hut away from the Port Traverse property line, as they agreed to do already during the site plan review process. These conditions will ensure that the effects on Port Traverse, if they're deemed to be an accessory use, are not more burdensome than the impacts from the operation of the hotel itself as a hotel. So in conclusion, the bottom line is that we're asking you to help TCW to be a good neighbor to Port Traverse by affirming your original decision and providing more detail to substantiate that, to make it bulletproof for any circuit court appeal. And I would ask for the opportunity to submit written responsive papers in rebuttal to the 100-page packet that I have received but not had a chance to fully digest between now and your next hearing, if that's how you choose to go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. All right, let's hear from TC Water Sports.
We have a simple visual aid, just a small collection of drawings that's incorporated in the memo that we'd like to have passed out here so you guys can look at this outside of the 122 pages.
And for the record, Mr. Chairman, my name is Joseph Zayas. I'm the attorney for TC Water Sports. The man standing to my right is Saburi Boyer. He is the main member of TC Water Sports LLC. I'll be beginning today's presentation. In total, we will speak 15 minutes, I promise you. I will attempt to give you kind of a legal framework of where we're going today and cede the remainder of my 15 minutes for Mr. Boyer to address factual issues since he is in the best position to do so. And to begin with, I guess, first I want to thank you for being here and spending time, extraordinary amount of time on this case. I do appreciate that your time is valuable, and I appreciate you giving us the opportunity. I also want to thank the staff for all the assistance they have provided, and also spending their valuable time on this case. I did want to address council's comments regarding the submission of our brief. Unfortunately, Mr. Boyer and his young daughter were extraordinarily ill in the 2 weeks before that brief was due, to the point where it was difficult for him to really do much of anything at all. As those of you that saw our submission know, Mr. Boyer spent an extraordinary amount of time trying to provide the board with as many facts as he could. I did contact staff for the township and inform them that due to Mr. Boyer's illness, unfortunately, we would be submitting this later than we had originally planned, and was told that that was acceptable. And so on Friday morning, we did submit our submission. I understand it was late. I understand you may not have had time to digest it all, and I apologize for that. Certainly have no objection if you wish to take more time to consider all the implications of this. That being said, I think from a legal standpoint, it's important for the township to look at what the court actually did. The comments that Judge Elsenheimer made in the remand process and how he viewed, or at least the hints he gave, as to how he viewed this case. And I think it's relevant to start off with that he put great significance on the fact that TC Water Sports, as well as Sugar Beach and Port Travers, are located within the Regional Business District. And the Regional Business District is specifically designed for this kind of business, for tourist business that create business for all of East Bay Township. And the judge, if you look at page 10 of the transcript that we submitted, put a lot of emphasis on that. And then the judge continued, Judge Elsenheimer continued, the principal use here is undoubtedly the waterfront hotel. Using the example in the ordinance related to a swimming pool or tennis court complex being customarily associated with and integrally related to a residential subdivision or multifamily development, I think would be regarded as, I think that the fact that we have a waterfront hotel and waterfront rental facility, certainly the use could be considered to be customarily associated with and integrally related to the principal use. Now, the judge did go on to say that ultimately it was the ZBA's decision and not his decision. But I think the ZBA would do well to note the judge's comments and give them credence and allow and take the guidance that the judge was trying to provide in the spirit in which he was trying to provide it. So I think that's important to note. Ultimately, the main theme that runs through the judge's opinion is that the court wants the ZBA to follow the ordinance. The court wants the ZBA to look at the ordinance itself and explain why or why not TC Water Sports is commonly associated with or integrally related to a hotel facility. Now, we think that's pretty clear. To have a water rental facility and a waterfront resort. Common sense indicates, as I think the judge noted here, that those two kinds of business are kind of businesses you would generally find together. And I've noted some case law in my brief, if you take some time to look it over, that supports that analysis. Now, the judge also noted what isn't in the ordinance, and the judge was concerned with restrictions on TC Water Sports being placed there that aren't in the ordinance, and specifically as to two different things. One is to this notion of expansion, and Mr. Boyer will deal with that in a second, the factual basis of that. But the judge noted that there's nothing in the ordinance itself dealing with expansion and saying, well, if a business expands past a certain time, a certain capacity, it's no longer an accessory use. And the reason that's important is that a business has a right to know what is expected of it. A business has a right to know what standards it's supposed to abide by and what standards it's not supposed to abide by. And if there's nothing in the ordinance saying, if you expand beyond X number of boats, you're no longer going to be an accessory use, that business won't be operating on a fair playing ground if all of a sudden that gets enforced that way. The other thing the court noted that's not in the ordinance, that the board seemed to place great emphasis on the first time, is this notion of bringing boats in from other areas and that somehow disqualifying as being accessory use. And the court, I think, noted in its decision, and it's on page 14 of its decision specifically, the court noted that that's also not in the ordinance. It's not a standard in the ordinance, so if the board is going to use that as a standard, it needs to explain why, and it needs to relate it back to the ordinance. So within that legal framework, what we really have here is an ordinance says that if the business is associated with or integrally related to the main business, it's an accessory use, subject to the qualification that it can't create more impacts. Now, it's important to note that those impacts that it's referring to aren't more impacts than what would otherwise be there, but more impacts than what the main business would generate. So what you're really comparing here is you're saying, does TC Water Sports create more impact than the Sugar Beach Resort? And part of that consideration is if TC Water Sports wasn't there renting boats and actually directing traffic away from the beach because its customers actually leave the beach. That's the whole point of renting boats, is to go out into the bay. And while I'm here, Saburi will address this more, but one, I have to note that a lot of those pictures dealing with boats going into Port Travers property, TC Water Sports doesn't use that side of the dock anymore. And two, the overall numbers of 500 per day are simply baseless. There's no evidence for those, but Mr. Boyer will address that specifically. Back to the point I'm trying to make is you have to compare what would otherwise be there. So if there was no rental business there, what impact would Sugar Beach Resort have, considering what else they may put there? Would they put a restaurant and bar? Would they bring in another water rental? Would they simply have more customers spread all over their beach that now don't have anywhere else to go because they can't take a boat out? That's the real standard you're trying to meet. And ultimately, before I let Mr. Boyer take the rest of my time, I noted Mr. Wendling's findings of fact, and I think he did an admirable job in a tough situation. I thank him for preparing this. And ultimately, reviewing these findings of fact, while we would contest the factual basis of finding number 3, I would ask the court to, or no, sorry, not the court, old habits. I would ask the board to adopt finding 5, finding 6, and finding 9 as being a valid support for finding that TC Water Sports is an accessory use of the ordinance. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your time, and I'll cede the remainder of my 15 minutes to Mr.
Excuse me, could you repeat those numbers?
Certainly. We would ask the board to adopt number 5, number 6, and number 9.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, I'm Saburi Boyer with TC Water Sports. Thank you all for the extraordinary amount of time that you've spent on this so far. I assure you that we are not here to try and get a blank check to do whatever we want. In fact, many of the recommendations that have been made in the past, we aren't even objecting to. What we're really here for is because we want to be treated fairly and equally to other businesses in East Bay Township, many of which have historically or currently are treated underneath the ordinance as accessory businesses to the principal use, many of which are boat rentals operating from hotels along the same corridor. There are numerous examples that we came up with in our memo that we've referenced. I'll just touch on a couple of them real quick. One of them is Breaking Waves Boat Rental from Park Shore Resort. It was issued a site plan approval in 1999. In that site plan approval, it was formally designated as an accessory use, including an understanding that it would be accepting guests both from the hotel and from the general public. TC Water Sports operates from Sugar Beach Resort. Sugar Beach also had a site plan approval done in 1994 before opening in 1995. As part of that site plan approval, the Werfel family who developed and built the Sugar Beach got verbal assurances from the township that they would be able to open a boat rental also as an accessory use. That boat rental opened up in 1995. It's called Sensational Water Sports. There's always been a boat rental at Sugar Beach that has operated as an accessory use from 1994 to current. And really up until the ZBA reversed the decision of the zoning administrator in 2021. The basis of that decision, the reversal, seemed to be mainly rooted in the idea of presumed idea of an expansion of TC Water Sports. The sole finding of fact to support that was regarding the idea that TC Water Sports was accepting guests who were not also guests staying at the hotel. Oddly, the ZBA had in its findings of fact evidence that was contrary to that, admitting that other businesses were known to be operating along this corridor, including hotels, restaurants, that were accessory uses accepting guests who are not members or not hotel guests, not staying at the hotel. This basis of expansion was further related back to a 2007 Bottomland Resolution document, one which was wholly irrelevant to the instant matter. It was irrelevant on a few different fronts. One, it did not in any way attempt to regulate the number of boats that were allowed to be rented by TC Water Sports. Very important distinction. It only regulated the number of boat hoists which were allowed to be placed on the bottomlands of Lake Michigan. Two completely separate issues. It's been confused throughout this entire process. It only regulated the number of hoists. That Bottomlands document was superseded and replaced by a 2021 document, one which was obtained by TC Watersports after it found out that it was in violation of the 2007 Bottomlands agreement. That 2021 document did in fact regulate the number of boats that TC Watersports was allowed to operate. That document stated that we could operate 16 jet skis and 10 boats. So again, that's the only relevant document to look at with regard to expansion. As opposing counsel has mentioned, the only evidence that they have are pictures. These pictures are taken grossly out of context, and our memo and the additional documentation we've provided you, including what's in front of you right now, strongly supports an opposing view, which is that TC Watersports has barely, if at all, expanded from 2014 to present. Ironically, Port Traverse was in gross noncompliance to its own dock permit and its own bottomland resolution during the entire time of this appeal, which at least makes us question some motives and whether or not these are genuine complaints. We really don't care about their lack of compliance. We don't care about how big their dock is. They can have as many boats as they want to have. I think they have a right to have access to the water for those boats. Our issue is with equal and fair treatment between both properties, and also to the extent that their lack of compliance also exacerbates any issues that they've complained of and have attributed these issues to TC Watersports. So issues of size, scope, proximity to the property line, all of these things have been compounded by the fact that Port Traverse has been in gross violation of their own dock permit, is closer to the property line, has a dock that's 3 times as wide as it's supposed to be, and has 3 times as many boats as they're supposed to have. So on the subject of impacts, a lot of what we're really looking at here is the second part of Section 221, which is impacts. There have been numerous memos that have gone into great detail on all these, and I'll try to do a brush stroke on them because we just simply don't have time. Traffic, dust, litter, congestion, noise, odors, and views. A lot of the impacts complained of by Port Traverse are directly relating to the size of the dock, the number of boats, and the proximity to the property line. These are mostly issues that fall within Eagle's jurisdiction and have been thoroughly fleshed out by the dock permitting process before TC Watersports was issued a dock permit last year. A lot of these complaints are also based firmly in the 2020 levels of intensity, which we have to admit were just crazy. It was the pandemic, the beginning of the pandemic, when people didn't know if it was safe to go outside. People didn't know what was safe. And as soon as the state and federal regulations lifted and people were allowed to leave their homes, they all showed up at TC Watersports. We didn't ask for that. We weren't prepared for it. We didn't handle it perfectly, and a lot of that caused the complaints that brought us here today. But it's important to remember that 2020 was a unique year. We had social distancing. We had record high water levels, which also further exacerbated these issues by compressing all of our guests into a very, very small area on the beach where they were right on top of each other. It was really a perfect storm. And so it's no wonder that that's the year that Preston Taylor received these complaints. As it relates to traffic, TC Watersports is required per its site plan to have parking for 22 vehicles. Sugar Beach has approximately 100 vehicles. Obviously, we have far less potential for traffic than Sugar Beach, and that is in favor of TC Watersports having a lesser impact. With regard to dust, TC Watersports customers are out on the water where there's no dust. Most of our customers are on the water. When they're on...
Your time's about up, so if you could wrap it up.
Okay,
Thank
all
you.
right. I'll just touch base on a key point with congestion. Congestion related to boats, people, the hut, and trespass. With regard to boats, this is clearly within Eagle's purview. With regard to people, our business model is to get people out on the water. It's not to keep them on the beach. So any congestion-related impact, including related to noise or visual impacts, TC Water Sports firmly believes that our customers are out on the water where they possess, or where they pose little potential to impact our neighbors. The location of the hut has been the other key issue that's been discussed by our neighbors.
Your time,
All right.
okay? Take 10 more seconds, go ahead.
It's all in the memo. We've put a lot of practices in place that have dramatically reduced the potential for those impacts. And we're very open to mitigation measures. We've offered a bunch of them in our memo.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you wish 5 minutes?
Yes, please.
Go ahead, you got 5.
If I could just have 1 minute to gather my thoughts, I didn't know I was going to be doing. Thank you very much. I'll begin. From the quick review that I was able to do of the documents that were submitted to y'all and that we received last night, and from the arguments that I've heard today from TCW, I believe that the sum of their arguments is that they're pointing their fingers, kind of trying to look at everyone else rather than addressing their own facts, looking at other hotels, other businesses, even at Port Traverse itself and Port Traverse's own operations. But I just want to remind the ZBA that that is not what you are here to look at. What's relevant here is specifically in this situation, whether TCW qualifies as an accessory use based on whether it's a significant standalone business on its own or incidental to the hotel, and whether it has impacts on neighboring properties that are more burdensome than the hotel it's operating as a hotel itself. Looking at the ZO, its specific requirements, that is what you are tasked to do, and I would ask that when you consider what other hotels have done or what other businesses have done, that you remember that the context for those approvals as accessory use might be completely different. Those other businesses may not have had the same impacts on other neighboring properties the way that TC Water Sports does on Port Traverse. So to the extent that other businesses have gotten accessory use designations, that's only relevant if it's the same context and same impact as what TCW has on Port Traverse. I'd also say that specifically the Break and Waves business is completely inapposite to this situation because that is the only and the principal business on that property. There's no hotel associated with that property that was mentioned by TCW. The other two businesses that they mentioned, I believe, are associated with hotels, but they're much smaller than their operations. And just to address the size of TCW's operations, I know that they provided these hand-drawn drawings of the docks. I think you've seen the photographs. We've presented them to you. They're not manipulated in any way. Photographs don't lie. I don't know how these drawings were created, but you can see with your own eyes that these operations have expanded in a major way over the last 9 years. And you can also see, I spent a lot of time looking at TCW's own website and their own description of their number of watercraft, how many people each of those watercraft seat. And if you think about how many times those boats are going out per day, the noise generated by the engines, the impact from fuel usage, and all the photographs that you saw of what happens with the way that fuel is used by TCW staff, there's just no denying photographs and the statements that TCW itself is making on its own website. And let's see, what else do I have to add? As Mr. Boyer was going through the impacts and his memo, which details what he believes are TCW's responses to the impacts that we've outlined, I think what that actually shows is TCW's identifying even more impacts than we are today, things that they recognize are significant impacts to Port Traverse, conceding that these are problems. These are things that they have themselves made concessions about to the Planning Commission in their site plan approval. They know that the rental hut on Port Traverse's property line is something that has been causing problems. They agreed to remove it or eliminate it completely for that site plan application. So I think that what that memo does is just reveal that they are admitting that there are these impacts, and the photographs of everything do not lie. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So now we'll open up the public hearing. If there's anybody who wishes to come up and say anything.
I apologize. Our conversation going on. All right. Well, I'd like to thank you all for being here this evening and listening to what we have to say to help us protect.
Could you,
Oh, I will do that.
thank you.
To help us protect what our
Now, could you
300.
identify yourself, please?
My name is Sally Somso. I'm at 1717 US 31 North. I'm the president of Port Traverse Condominium Association, and I'm here also speaking in behalf of myself. TC Water Sports does not qualify as an accessory business to the Sugar Beach Resort, but is a standalone business. This is not the same business that was at this location in 2007, utilizing 4 boat hoists and 4 jet ski hoists. The township cited that the use of said seasonal dock shall be limited to residents and guests of the Sugar Beach Resort, and the dock shall not be used for any other commercial purposes. This commercial business has grown substantially since 2014, when TC Water Sports arrived. Daily summer business. TCW can have more customers than the hotel has daily room check-ins. In regards to the TC Water Sports, Port Traverse residents have been in contact with the township officials since 2016 with correspondence, and there also was in-person visits to the zoning offices. We try to be patient, but how many boats can this commercial business utilize, and how many customers can arrive on a daily basis on the small piece of the beach adjacent to our residential community? As was stated, many of our owners would like to have been here tonight, but they are off in other places. Our township has been concerned about 50 daycare patrons or 150 to 200 users of other venues such as wedding barn event centers, or the 200 to 450 people that were projected to use GoRec on the 500 acres. We are concerned about TCW's hundreds and hundreds of customers utilizing a portion of the beach each and every day during the summer. What happens when the 8 or 9 boats fill up with 7 people, 10 people, or 16 people and are rented out 5 or 6 times a day? Add that number to the 12 jet skis that are rented out multiple times per day. Hours, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Then add in the extra pontoon boats and jet skis that they bring to this area here that are anchored around the south end of the bay and recycled into the fleet throughout the day. I am sure that the township board back in 2007 had no idea that this business would become this large and have such a burdensome effect on the neighboring residential properties, health, safety, and welfare. They set limitations that were not adhered to by this commercial business. TCW is a full-blown standalone business and is not an accessory business. When the hotel parking lot is full, where do these people from the general public all park? The answer? Wherever they can find a parking spot, be it at Port Traverse, Pirates Cove Mini Golf across the street, the former Pizza Hut lot, or the Smoke and Porter parking lot, and probably in other nearby parking lots as well.
Sally?
Yes.
You want to,
I will. Many of these customers funnel across the busy highway and travel through our parking lot and commons area with their coolers, so we know where they're going. You can follow them, as a matter of fact. Then they go out on their boat, and then come back and trespass against our property again. So they actually visit us twice. In concluding, Port Traverse owners ask that the ZBA reconfirms their prior determination from December 2021 that TC Water Sports does not qualify as an accessory use under the East Bay zoning ordinance, and that they are more burdensome to Port Traverse than the Sugar Beach as a hotel. Thank you very much. And if I could have 1 more minute in rebuttal to Saburi's question about us being not in compliance with our
I'm sorry,
document.
we have 3 minutes and that's it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. This is the Department of the Army permit. We have one. Tell them the date and
Tina Powers. I am a co-owner of Condominium 25 at Port Traverse Condo Association, 1717 North, US 31 North. Okay, so we've got right here the Department of Army permit, seasonally construct, 4 foot wide by 304 foot long, main pier centered on the property with the landward end of the pier located 150 feet from the waterward face of the concrete wood deck. Install 160 foot by 4 foot T at the waterward end of the main pier with 5 foot 3 inches by 20 foot finger piers on the landward side. Place 11 boat hoists, 8 personal watercraft hoists, and 1 catamaran hoist on the pier. We comply with this.
Okay.
This is what we are allowed to do. Okay? Do you want me to give it to him? He's got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is there anybody else?
Good evening and thank you. My name is Justin Mortier. I'm a resident of East Bay, 833 Vienna Way, formerly the general manager of the Sugar Beach. I have no benefit either way moving forward with this, but I felt that some history might help. This is a transient district. Some people enjoy that, people watching, excitement, activity. Some people do not. There's no doubt that all property values have increased in the amount of time that we're talking about here. There's no doubt that the occupancy in the hotel has increased over that time period. There is no doubt that the revenue generated in the hotel is increased. So it would make sense that the auxiliary supply would need to follow that same path and would increase. There's no limit set on businesses. There's no one out here that tells you you can only make this much money. So I think placing restrictions on a business, and there's nothing that anyone can prove that says that this is an accessory business or this is a standalone business. It's too arbitrary and abstract. That's why we're here. I think the bottom line that you're going to end up with is you either have to decide that this is where you want to live or it's not. You have the same size of dock in both situations. You have about the same number of watercraft in both situations. They're being used differently. The Sugar Beach, if this entity goes away, the Sugar Beach could put up a marina with 50 boats if the Eagle says it's okay. The last thing I'll say is to the character of the people that run this business. Anytime that any complaint ever came through, these people were the first ones to go and knock on the door, ask what we can do to resolve it, myself included. We have been great neighbors, not just good neighbors. I have swam in the bay at 1 o'clock in the morning rescuing Port Traverse boats and jet skis when they floated off of a hoist during a storm, right alongside members and owners of Port Traverse. We have swapped landscaping equipment when theirs breaks or ours breaks. We have been great neighbors. Anytime an issue has come up, we address it immediately. The sheriff's department shows up, they meet with them, they have their equipment inspected. This is not a fly-by-night type of operation. This is the type of people that you want to do business with. And the fact that they have made concessions to try to make things work does not admit guilt or overreaching facts. It's about a compromise and being a great neighbor. So let's not lose sight of that. Everyone has the same idea of wanting to be on the water and enjoying what Traverse City has. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing at 7:45. Okay. Let's bring it back to the board.
I guess my first question is, where does our authority lie? I heard a lot of things from Port Traverse about trespassing, noise order, fire compliance, and transport of gas. Also read in the literature that the fire marshal has approved the trailer and where it's parked, and the way the gas is transported down to the, and stored at the dock, is what I'm assuming. And then the transport from the gas station to Sugar Beach would be under DOT. It would have nothing to do with what we do. So I think that's probably out of the court. Those two things are off the table as far as I'm concerned. I'd like to discuss more about the trespass. So what exactly is trespass on the bay side of Port Traverse? Where can people legally walk and where can they, excuse me, not legally walk?
That's my question, too.
Yeah, on the waters of the Great Lakes, people can walk, they just can't stop. They can pass through under the public trust doctrine anywhere below the ordinary high water mark, which is generally defined as where permanent vegetation begins. That's allowable on the beachfront. Because it's the waters of the Great Lakes, there's no private beachfront, so to speak, on the Great Lakes to that extent. As far as going over the rest of the property, of course, that would be a trespass.
Do we know if there's been any trespassing complaints that have resulted in law enforcement coming out to issue citations or remove people from the property? Have you ever heard of that history over
I'm
the
not aware
course?
of any. Lindsay?
So just to be clear, you had mentioned, Mr. Wendling, early on in the meeting, that we're supposed to be making a decision today, tonight, on whether this is or is not an accessory use.
It's twofold, okay?
Okay.
Yes, it's important first to make that decision.
But it's a yes or no, that is the decision. It is or it is not an accessory use.
Yes. The only caveat to that is you can say it's an accessory use. However, under section 221-2B, albeit an accessory use, it says an accessory use, meaning it's determined to be one, shall not generate any effects on neighboring properties, including but not limited to various items that are listed there, but of course it's broader than that. So you could very well determine that, yes, it's an accessory use, but this type of accessory use is in violation of section 2C because it does X, Y, and Z, and you have to support that as part of your findings on that.
Okay.
Or you could determine that it's not an accessory use, and I would still recommend addressing the 2C if that's your determination, saying, and by the way, this type of use is overly burdensome because of X, Y, and Z, so to speak. Part of that is in the findings and can be expanded upon either by board members or, through direction of staff.
Well, I guess I don't understand what the, if that's the board's decision that it is an accessory use, but it is in violation because of whatever the findings of fact are, what's the end result? How does the end result differ from whether we determine if it's not an accessory use?
I don't think it makes a substantial amount of difference, at least to the scope and scale of the use here. One thing that was presented tonight, which is in the materials as well, is the lease that does limit the to the 10 boats and the 16 jet skis, related to that. So at least you have a scope and final figure as to the amount. The history probably will have some relevance to the ZBA because part of what part of your analysis purportedly under section 221, particularly 2C, is that, well, at some point it was an accessory use and it didn't violate 2C, or it wasn't an accessory use, but even so it didn't violate 2C. That's why the court needs you to also make a decision under 2C, no matter what, one way or the other. if it's an accessory use, but it violates 2C, and I guess the court can take a look at that as well, ultimately on appeal. The issue is, if it's in violation, then you're not allowed to do it. Okay, you're not allowed to engage in activity that generates effects on neighboring properties, with these examples, that is more burdensome than such impacts from the main use on the property. I wish there were separate findings which you could look at, just like for a variance, where you could make that determination, and perhaps that'll be part of what is being done on the redo of the zoning ordinance, but we have to address the language as it exists. So it does make your decision a little bit more difficult, and it doesn't guarantee ultimately that your decision will be satisfactory to the judge. I do recommend, taking a look at the judge's opinion. It's in the materials there. But essentially, those are the judge said, I want both. Okay, I want to see, A, is this an accessory use here? And, whether it is or isn't, is there a problem still under Section 2C?
Can I ask a sorry, go ahead.
There's one
Peter.
thing I want to add to that here. It says generate effects on neighboring properties. The standard doesn't say what is going on the neighboring properties, okay? It doesn't differentiate between residential neighbors, commercial neighbors, or other neighbors within the zoning district. It just says neighboring properties. Keep that in mind as well. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no problem. I wanted to note from a previous ZBA case, and let me know if I'm getting into the weeds. They stated there's only 16 jet skis and 10 boats. Are there any additional canoes, kayaks, stand-up paddleboards, anything of that nature?
Those are the only motorized ones that we're aware of, but I would, Preston, are you aware of that? As far as-
I honestly don't know if there's additional non-motorized units.
Okay, because it made me think of our previous ZBA case where we were talking about a boat is a boat is a boat. So is there any additional watercraft or boats from the zoning ordinance perspective that are being utilized on that property? As well as, I heard, you don't need to be a hotel guest, but it's often pretty common to not be a hotel guest, but still utilize the amenities of a hotel. The Park Shore has an open restaurant that people who aren't at the hotel can utilize. The Grand Traverse Resort, is pretty expansive, just to name a few. So I just wanted to
Keep in
note
mind,
those
you can
things.
ask the parties that are here, including the applicant, that very question. If you want the applicant to answer whether there's other rentals that they're responsible for or they observe from the hotel, you can go ahead and.
Yeah, that would be great. Can we ask the
By all means, go ahead.
question?
This would be Mr. Boyer.
Yeah, thank you for that. Most of the focus that we've made has been on motorized watercraft. The packet that I handed you guys at the beginning of the meeting does have an insurance schedule of vessels for 2014-15 that delineates the date of in-service placement for each boat, and it also specifies whether they're motorized or non-motorized, and it covers that.
I guess the question is, are there also other?
Are there others?
Are there other boats?
Yes, yeah, it's all incorporated in that document. So there definitely are some there.
Well, let me be clear. Do you rent watercraft other than jet skis and boats, pontoon boats?
Yes, sir, yeah, we rent kayaks and paddleboards as well.
Okay, there's your, right.
That's what I was getting at.
Rod?
Yeah, just a thought or two here. I'm looking at it as an accessory or not an accessory. And going back to some of the wording that about generating additional traffic noise, all the things that we've heard. I wondered, and I don't know, but this past year, this has been dialed back from what we were presented to a smaller entity of a business through the Planning Commission. Have there been the complaints and so on once this got dialed back?
Once the site plan approval took place.
The site plan approval.
I have not received a complaint other than correspondence related to future hearings. I've not received complaints from an individual or.
Of the type of too many boats, too many people along the lot line, that type of thing?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's important to add this, because I know that TC Water Sports, would state that as well. We know that there's a site plan out there that's been approved, but it doesn't change the nature of the ZBA's decision-making on whether it's an accessory use, regardless of whatever the site plan says. And I'm presuming that the reason, and I think it's a logical presumption, is that there are certain restrictions on the site plan that wouldn't necessarily apply if it's determined that it's an accessory use. Placement of the building seems to be a very strong, issue, related to that. Just so you know that we know that the site plan's there, but the board has to make a decision regardless of the site plan, is this an accessory use? As if, whether it's there, the site plan's there or not.
Well, and I was looking at it in the respect that it, there is wording that activities that impact Port Traverse of noise, trespass, that thing, and I'm looking at trying to just general knowledge of, okay, did it go from that accessory use or whatever that is to impacting other people?
Can I get the answer? Okay, thanks.
I mean, I think in regards to complaints over the past year, may not be fair to everybody, considering this has been kind of an ongoing issue. People may have made assumptions that this is still being sort of hashed out. It's in the courts, it's at the, at the ZBA or the township level.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's just maybe not another way to look at it. Peter, as far as what we're making a determination on tonight, we've kind of had some conversations around, I think at the last meeting, December of last year, about the intensity and how that has changed over time and the expansion. But the decision that's being made tonight, this is based on the current operation, right? We're making a determination on the current operation and the current impact,
And
correct?
the reason that you can do that on the current operation has to do with the leasehold limitations themselves. So we know what those limits are, at least on the motorized watercraft. So you do have that fixed number, which I think is actually helpful. Otherwise, in the future, I know there's the argument from TC Water Sports that the ordinance and that the judge's opinion to a certain extent says, well, we don't know, what an expansion is, but you have to have some logic as well. What if you had a 50, I think somebody mentioned a 50-boat marina on there? Does that change, is that an accessory use to the hotel? Those are the things that you're going to be looking at. And the intensity of the use goes up against the 2C, where I can imagine almost any type of use at some point, there may be others, some that are not, okay, would have an increase and at some point become more burdensome from impacts compared to the main use. But there are other points that are valid too. Once the jet ski's out on the waters of Grand Traverse Bay, it's out and doing whatever in the bay. Is that part of the impact on the property? And there's an argument that no, that's not part of the impact on the property because the boat is out there under navigable waters that are under the jurisdiction of the state of Michigan and are not really part of the zoning. The zoning has to do with what's going on directly on the property itself. Once they come in, what's occurring on the docks, what's occurring on the shoreline. That's the purview of the ZBA. So one thing you don't, I think, have to concentrate on is, what happens when the boat is, once it's rented and they're offshore. It's everything that the activity inshore, onshore. That's an issue here.
Okay. And I know we have to sort of keep our blinders on from a zoning board perspective and focus on the, yeah. So, but I was going to ask about the site plan approval from this summer that went through. Just to be clear, that did establish the legal ability for TC Water Sports to operate in perpetuity now, obviously without any kind of zoning violations, with some conditions, right?
Yes.
Regardless of what we determine tonight.
That's correct.
Okay.
But obviously, they have a right and they have a desire to have it, haven't come before the ZBA and determined that it's also an accessory use. And they have reasons, for doing so, and that's how we're here.
Okay.
Can I just make one more comment? With the Planning Commission site plan approval this summer, the boats and the conditions that were placed on it were tied back to, as I'm sure you're aware, standards in the zoning ordinance related to parking and site plan review standards related to noise and adjacent. So they were able to tie them back to standards. In other past approvals where the township has approved an accessory use as part of a site plan review, we see similarly that the Planning Commission, through the site plan review process, has approved accessory uses. Specifically, the Park Shore was an example. We also found the Cherry Tree Inn, where they specifically state, the number of boats, the pool, the restaurant-specific information that they, again, tie back to parking and other standards. So part of the challenge with this is that we don't have it documented in site plan approval as a part of the Sugar Beach Hotel.
So there never was a formally established accessory use for this?
Not in our written documentation.
And certainly not, regulated as part of an approval of the main use, which has been done, in other developments. I think there's probably some examples going back in the past that's similar to this one where it wasn't done. And Section 221 is silent on requiring that to be done. Again, part of what the township is revamping as far as the ordinance. So we're still stuck with the language of 221. So that although it may have been done in other situations, it's not a requirement under the zoning ordinance for determining whether an accessory use exists.
I rattle around about accessory use, and in my thought process is, obviously, the accessory use has to be some part of a larger entity that has, in this case, we're talking about a hotel. And bringing that back, there's obviously the example that a hotel can do one of two things. They can have a restaurant there that is the hotel's restaurant that is for the accessory use of the guests that are there, or outside folks that walk in. We have that. Or in some cases, they could be providing a service where, in fact, they are bringing in a standalone company, but as a franchisee, such as, a coffee area, whether it be, any type of different coffee organization or some type of other shop. So my question comes in I have a couple. Number one is that if the hotel, the Sugar Beach Hotel, was closing down for purposes of renovation, let's say, so as opposed to closing down completely, would TC Watersports, and this is a question to you, sir, if you would come up to the podium here, would TC Watersports still function if, in fact, the hotel was not functioning?
Yes, that really depends on what your idea of functioning is. Being profitable, probably not.
Not talking about profitable. I'm asking, would you be servicing the public with boats? Would you be in operation if the hotel was not functioning?
I have a hard time with the hypotheticals on that.
It's pretty simple. The question is,
I mean, I guess it depends on if they're doing a renovation that affects.
yeah, I mean, if they were,
capable of-
I'm not saying that they're not demolished, they're not gone, they're there. Listen,
We utilize the bathrooms of the hotel, so we rely on the bathrooms for all of our guests, so I'm not sure that we'd be able to operate without having bathrooms.
So do I take it then, if the hotel was temporarily non-operational, then you would not be operational?
I believe so, correct.
Okay, thank you. Another question I have is on the walking past the property. So I need, where in fact, do they actually walk past the property or do they walk on the property?
Thank you. As far as walking on the property, I do believe that there's a rental kiosk on the other side of Port Traverse. TC Watersports has a rental kiosk on the other side of Port Traverse's property, so they advertise there and say, walk to Sugar Beach Hotel. So they have to go from one side of Port Traverse across the beachfront on the sand.
On the beachfront?
On the beachfront, not in the water. And I also just wanted to note that we do believe that you, as a zoning board, have the power to regulate some riparian, some water issues because of the powers that the MZEA grants to zoning boards to govern natural resources. So the area in the docking space and in the water, even if people are walking just in the water, we do believe is under your jurisdiction as well to consider as part of this issue. And we've outlined that in previous memos that are in the exhibits to the packet tonight.
Thank you.
You can walk the beach.
Yeah, I'm,
But, as far as docking and what occurs on the shoreline and activity, sure.
right, I'm talking about walking the beach, going from point A to point B. Are they actually going on the property? And apparently not. They're walking in front of the property on the beach side.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. They are walking on Port Traverse's property, both on the beach and also, as Sally said during her public comment, walking sometimes through the parking lot area, through Port Traverse to the hotel, to the TCW rental area. But they walk on the sand and on the beach, which is the property of Port Traverse.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, what I'm struggling with right now is to have some quantifiers for what is exhibiting any effects regarding noise and the traffic that's more burdensome from the impacts on the main property. I'm struggling to find quantifiers that would really make that sink in
Clear.
for me.
Yeah. I can't address that. Is there anybody who wants to address the,
I just think.
and you'll get your opportunity.
I just think there's some common sense here, and like I said, just looking at the website of TC Watersports itself, thinking of the number of boats, the number of people, I think we've laid out visually and in terms of description just how many people are coming to TC Watersports every day. We think it's upwards of 500 people, making noise, renting boats multiple times a day from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. This is a very loud group of customers playing music, yelling, hanging out with each other right on the Port Traverse property line. There's a photo that you can see in the printouts of the slides that I showed tonight where there's a line of customers immediately next to the Port Traverse condominium that looks out onto the rental hut. So you can just imagine, I think it's common sense, that many people, that level of noise, that many motorized boats, upwards of the numbers that I told you, including kayaks and paddle boards. This is a significant number of people every day. And not to mention all the other impacts that we mentioned of the odors from gasoline. There are plenty of letters in your packet of people detailing what the experience was of smelling gasoline that's spilled in the waters, not being told that it's been spilled, and then swimming and realizing that they're swimming in waters where oil's been spilled, seeing staff pouring soap to try to clean up oil spills, not in keeping with their own practices on that. Just these impacts are so far-reaching that I think you just have to imagine from your own life experience and from looking at these photos what that would be like. And I just wanted to add that they are operating as a standalone business. Even if the hotel were to shut down, they have site plan approval for their standalone business at this point. So they can operate on their own. They're not required to shut down just because there are no bathrooms. I would imagine that their site plan, as it's in the packet, would detail all the aspects of their business that are required to be there for them to operate, which they have approval for at this point.
Thank you. Sir?
And so, let's apply a little common sense. If you were to accept council's statement, you would have to think that every time Port or TC Watersport sends a boat out,
that has 10 people on it. It doesn't make sense. That's obviously not what's going on here. And so when we look at these impacts, what we're looking at, according to the ordinance, is does it create more impacts than, not add to the impacts of the main business? Does it create more impacts than the main business? Would TC Water Sports by itself create more impacts than Sugar Beach by itself? And the answer to that, I think, just common sense-wise, is clearly no, it would not. No, it would not. And there's really no substantiation here for 500 a day. You would have to believe that every boat that goes out there has 10 people on it, going out there multiple times a day. And it doesn't make any sense. And then you show a picture from the 4th of July during the pandemic year, the busiest day TC Water Sports has ever had, and pretend that that's the norm. It's not. And it doesn't make any sense to believe that. So if you look at a 100-suite hotel, and you look at a boat rental operating out of that hotel, that's the comparison you have to make. And to address whether they could operate without the resort or not, you got to remember they use the parking from the resort, they use the bathrooms from the resort. They're really connected in that way. And it'd be very difficult, if not impossible, for them to operate at all, as Mr. Boyer told you, without the resort being open and operating. And council sitting up here and saying, well, their site plan says it could, is simply, it's not true. Which unfortunately has been indicative of a lot of the allegations that have been thrown at TC Water Sports through this entire process. And that's unfortunate. But common sense, if you look at a 100-suite resort compared to this boat rental, it doesn't take a whole lot to determine that it's not going to create the same impact.
Thank you. All right. Any other thoughts?
You know,
Questions?
I've kind of struggled with the same thing, you know, being able to establish some concrete evidence around being able to quantify how many people, you know, what could be the worst case. And I guess, you know, doing some math here, if the hotel's 100 rooms, I don't know what a standard is, what a zoning standard is for hotel room capacity. Is it 3 people per room, 4 people per room?
It's one parking spot, so.
One parking spot, okay. So there's 100. And, you know, considering the amount, I know we've heard that, you know, hey, maybe it's unrealistic to expect that there's 10 people on a boat every time, but realistically, there could be, right? You start doing some quick math, and you probably run out of parking spots at the hotel on a busy day, realistically. You may potentially double at any given time the amount of people that are in the hotel above and beyond what the hotel is actually used for people that are staying there. So, you know, I could probably do some back of the napkin math on it, but it seems pretty obvious that there are conditions that the TC Water Sports operation could operate under at capacity, and I don't know, in my mind, double the amount of people in the hotel at any given time.
Matt, I have to agree with you a little bit on that. And the other thing is, a hotel, that couple or small family or big family, whatever, comes and stays in that hotel. And that's their place for those hours of the day. If we look at the number of boats, and we take that each time that boat goes out, at 4 or 5 times a day, if you've got 5 people times 5 times a day, all of a sudden that number becomes very large compared to 100 rooms with 2 or 3 people in it.
Yeah, and I think probably the challenge for, you know, probably the challenge I would imagine, the reason this has kind of come to a head is not the operation that's happened out on the water, where it's not bothering anybody. It's probably people getting off the boats, people waiting to get on boats, standing around, waiting, congregating in certain areas until it's their turn, until their reservation time or whatever. And that is probably the most intense amount of activity, and it's taking place there at the shoreline on the beach close to the condominium. That's what I'm imagining. I haven't been out there during this, but I would imagine that's probably the case.
And there's that rollover each time. It's just like a seating at a restaurant. Every time that rollover
Yeah.
comes in and out.
There are some things, yeah, truly I can see where, even though we're talking primarily people, there are operations right now that the hotel, or would not be if the hotel did not have that facility, particularly the gas. And I can see in having these boats or jet skis going out, coming in, coming out, coming in, I can see any number of times where they would be having to refuel with the obvious issues of gasoline odor and certainly the potential, not necessarily happening, but the potential for spills. But that's not at this point an issue. But I can see that, and as I say, I think I'm with everybody else wrestling in my mind as to, okay, fine, what is more than what the principal entity would be doing? What is the effect of having that? Was it 10 boats and 16 jet skis in any one day, moving in and out constantly?
It's kayaks and paddleboards.
Kayaks and pedal boards also. I'm not too worried about those.
Peter, are we as a board concerned about what happens on the water, or are we just looking at what happens on the land? I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't want to see any gas in the bay, but I mean, is that...
Activity on the shoreline. I mean, that's, zoning is all about land use, okay?
Right.
Which includes, access to water, what occurs on the landward side of the access.
So we're more concerned about spills in the land than we would be what's happening on the dock.
Well, it could be both, but I mean, part of regulations can include docks. There's a question mark on docks, in the Great Lakes. I do know some other townships in the area that do have dock regulations on the bays, where the bays are narrow enough that, people bother keeping a dock, because otherwise it get destroyed by storms, and still does, even in narrow portions of the bay. But that's the landward side, in the immediate vicinity of the dock, including the dock. That's the area of regulation, and that's the impact of the accessory use on the property, is what occurs there and is heard there, seen there, done there on the shoreline, whether directly adjacent to the water or on the beach itself on the property that we're looking at. Keep in mind that you do have other accessory uses, within the township that are also, open to the public, and, like Claire mentioned before, on those occasions, on those other ones, some of them, many of them at least, were looked at originally on their site plan and took into consideration the parking and all that as an accessory use, and some were not. And it doesn't state in the ordinance, you have to consider that as part of the site plan review, that all accessory uses have to be addressed. It's a good thing that it's done, and maybe that'll be something that'll be mandated also in the future as the ordinance changes, but.
It sounds like a hint.
Yes, well, I'm aware of.
There have been many hints placed on the...
They're being dealt with through this
Sorry.
amendment process, so.
Right.
But we have to address, what's here. And, and the board should continue deliberating, but I do ask, even if I'm getting a direction, from the board, that the ultimate decision be made at the January meeting, so that I can, because I'm making notes too as you do comments there, and I want to make sure that we have the best record possible, no matter what your decision is, and then we'll see what the judge does, because ultimately we need to get it done.
Can I ask you a question, Mr. Wendling?
Sure.
Is it appropriate if the board or the ZBA was to determine, and I'm not saying that we are, if it was or was not an accessory use, could we make a contingency that if the hotel were no longer to operate, that accessory use would no longer be able to operate?
You could put, that's a statement made tonight, and that's, by the applicant. That's more of a general finding of fact. You could certainly add that to the general findings of fact. I'm not sure it's going to be the ultimate decision maker, could be on whether it is an accessory use, because the fact is that the hotel is operating, and the question is, with an operating hotel, is this an accessory use?
Yeah, it's part of the record now, yeah.
But it's part of the record, you can add that as a general finding. That's an example of something, should be put in there.
Thank you.
The other question is that are we to be, is there any other conditions that if we were to possibly find it as an accessory use, that there could be other conditions placed similar to what the Planning Commission did?
I think we've been looking at this and struggling, because when you have a condition, for example, on a site plan review or a special use permit, the condition has to relate directly to a standard contained in the zoning ordinance. And it's a little more difficult to do that, with an accessory use, because you don't have a lot of language that pertains directly to the accessory use. That's why it's best to deal with it at the site plan, where you do have those standards and you do have other conditions, because it overall addresses the use of the property. Here we just have a standalone, hey, this is an accessory use or not, and if you make that determination, we don't have an underlying regulatory scheme in this case. It would be difficult to do it. I mean, I could come out, I'll see what I can do and take a second look at it, at the ordinance, but it's looking difficult for this board to make conditions on this type of a ruling compared to, a dimensional variance.
Well, with more knowledge as time has gone on, not so much directly tied to the ordinances, but there were some allowances that the owner of TC Water Sports had give some conditions that he had provided to the planning board, and can those conditions be incorporated?
Therefore, the site plan review, there was mention tonight by TC Water Sports. I'm trying to remember whether it was through their attorney or through another party, but of certain concessions and things that they've already done, okay, irrespective of the site plan approval. If those materials are contained as part of their presentation, I think it's easier to attach those as conditions if it's determined that this is an accessory use. If, it's an accessory use, and here's how, and here are the conditions that make it an accessory use, I can use those items. It's harder for me to find items, I think, that would be legally supportable contained directly in the zoning ordinance under other standards. But I'll take a look at it. It's more difficult. However, it's not a bad idea for the board to say, well, if there are conditions, these are the types of things that we'd like to see. That's why it gives us time to see if it's viable.
Okay, good, thank you.
You made a comment that that the township staff went through and tried to find other accessory uses similar to this. Were those accessory uses for, I guess, motorized boat rental at hotels? Is that what it is? And I guess, were those approved through a site plan review?
We found, so in our records, we found one instance, and it was at Park Shore Resort, in which the jet ski rental location was specifically indicated on the site plan. It was in the minutes, it was in the discussion. There's other rental operations throughout the corridor where we don't have any documentation of site plan approval, standalone as well as in tandem with resorts and other operations. So we were able to find one instance with boat rentals that was incorporated as a part of the Planning Commission site plan review process. And in that instance, the Planning Commission considered it accessory, but still considered it as part of the site plan review.
Yeah, there's another one at the Cherry Tree, too, but that was a different situation.
And that was, yep, that was
a spa of some
a
type.
spa where parking
Yeah.
was considered.
Right.
Mhm.
I thought I thought somebody was going to say something there. Nope? Okay.
No, I was
Oh.
clear. Sorry.
Okay.
I think the one thing I just keep going back to, though, is the accessory use has some wording about it being incidental or insubstantial part of the principal, or of the total activity that takes place on a lot. It also goes on that an accessory use cannot further, shall not generate any effects of on neighboring properties, including noise, traffic, parking. I'm having a real problem, just, they're in there, and obviously, there's a lot of history that there's some of that going on. So I just, in my mind, I'm having a real hard time just getting over that it's even an accessory. I think accessories, get started in some cases. It may stay that way. But, this is just, it's definitely not incidental and insubstantial.
The other accessory use that you said was approved through, that you had records that was approved through site plan, are they kind of in a similar condition here where they're adjacent to like a full-time residential property?
Is Park Shore next to, I don't think there's a condo next, no.
I don't believe so.
Cherry Tree is, and they have had boat rentals in the past, but we don't have any documentation as a part of their site plan approval with discussion of boat rentals.
When you say in the past, just sporadically, or they have
That
them
was,
every
I mean,
summer?
that was my conversation with former manager there
Okay.
that had worked there for years.
Okay. Okay. All right.
You'll also see that there was, and this was received, I think, on Monday of this week, included, I think it was Exhibit 28, Preston? Was a submission with, what was the name of the rental company? Not Breaking Waves, but
Blue Sky?
Blue Sky Rentals, kind of going through, he's got 3 different rentals, 2 of them in East Bay Township, and kind of a discussion of what his rental portfolio looks like in East Bay Township. And again, from our records, we don't have any documentation of those approvals going through the Planning Commission with site plan review. Smaller operations in terms of total number of boats than what we're looking at with TC Water Sports.
Okay. The reason I asked the question about the adjacent properties, I guess I would think that it would be, a full-time residential property might be a little more sensitive to some of the intensities of the impacts than, say, another hotel or restaurant, some other kind of use.
It's probably more difficult for Preston to find it, but I found it here. I can read that with Blue Sky, and it's part of the record. It says, Blue Sky Rentals has been in business for almost 15 years. I bought Blue Sky July 1st, 2020. We have 3 locations on East Bay. We operate out of the beach condos, Cherry Tree Inn, and Grand Traverse Resort. Each location has a small rental shack on the beach. We offer pontoons, jet skis, kayaks, and paddleboards. Concerning the 2 locations in East Bay Township, and then parentheses, Cherry Tree and beach condos, I store 3 pontoons and 4 jet skis on hoists at the beach condos. These hoists are near the west property line, close to Peninsula Bay condos. I communicate with Peninsula Bay each spring to make sure hoist locations are acceptable. If they have any concerns, I adjust accordingly. We do not keep any boats at the Cherry Tree. Kayaks and paddleboards are stacked along the side of the rental shacks when not in use. When pontoon or jet ski reservations are made at the Cherry Tree Inn, we run the necessary watercraft to that location. Depending on watercraft availability and business activity, we may bring a boat from the GT Resort. I staff the beach condo location with 3 to 4 employees daily. The Cherry Tree will have 1 to 2 employees depending on activities. With regards to parking, the Cherry Tree Inn is really its own little entity. Cherry Tree is the last hotel on that stretch of beach. I do not get much of any walk-up or drive-up business there. Any business we get from that location comes from guests of that hotel, so parking is already handled. The beach condos do get walk-up and drive-up business. The majority of my business at the beach condos is walk-up business. Those customers are staying at the adjacent hotels or at the state park. Drive-up business at that location will use the beach condo parking area when necessary. I've never had parking complaints from property owners or management at either location. When making boat reservations, we always ask the renter where they are staying. If they are driving in or coming with a large group, we suggest the Grand Traverse Resort location. Parking is more available there. As part of my operating agreement with those locations, we perform daily maintenance around each property. Every morning, we groom the beaches with a large drag and ATV. We also empty trash in the morning and evening. We keep the beach furniture clean and organized throughout the day. In the off-season, we shrink wrap and/or store the beach and pool furniture at an off-site location. We seem to have a great relationship with each location. We work well together. Hope this wasn't too much information. And it's signed by a Scott Ripmaster of Blue Sky Rentals with a phone number.
Mr. Boyer, do you have a percentage of what your clientele is from different walk-up, hotel or drive-to and drive-in?
I do. It's been a minute since I've looked at it, so I'm not the sharpest on it, but I believe what's in the record is approximately 60% directly from Sugar Beach, approximately 20% from Grand Beach,
Okay, there's 20%.
and 20% drive-in. Or drive-in or walk-in elsewhere. That's all. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, what is the pleasure of the board?
I would like to follow Mr. Wendling's recommendation and keep this, well, I guess, would your recommendation be to close the hearing and deliberate at the next meeting? Is that what you
Well, you're already
stated?
in deliberation, so you're simply tabling the matter and for continued deliberations, which will be scheduled as part of the next business meeting. We will, of course, I've written down, your comments in detail. I'll also be looking at the video because I believe that it's taped, and we'll need to have that for the minutes as well. Make sure that we'll have the minutes will be quite detailed, probably a little bit more than what you normally would expect. And I will fan out, so to speak, various findings there to give you choices based upon your comments and questions today, so that you have even a more expansive record. My goal is to make sure that whatever your decision is, that it's supported by the competent material and substantial evidence on the record, and supports the issues that the court wish to look at on remand. Of course, you're free to pick and choose. You'll have a choice, either way, of which findings to utilize, including mine or any submitted by counsel. I do recommend, though, that you make a decision, either that the record is closed tonight, or if you're going to accept any more material, let it be in short order, within the next few days, after which it's closed, so that when you receive your January packet, you have A, everything you need, and B, you know that there's nothing else to look at as far as the record is done. It's ready for your finishing touch as far as deliberations at that point.
Thank you.
I do have one quick question. Is there an ordinance in the books that has a noise level on the property line?
You have East Bay Township joined with other townships, I'm not sure if they're all the townships, but maybe they are, in contracting with Grand Traverse County such that every township has the same noise ordinance. Okay? That noise ordinance is not a decibel-based level. It's what's called a reasonable person type of determination. And it's then contracted currently, and I don't believe that the townships are being charged and being enforced through the sheriff and the Grand Traverse County prosecutor's office. And being a former sheriff's deputy, Preston, is that correct?
That's correct.
Your understanding? So it's not a particular level. It's the reasonable person standard, and that could be, someone could challenge that, and if you want to look at some fun cases involving that, I'm trying to remember that winery on the west, just west of here, with Bingham Township, they've been fighting with that, with a winery there for tens of thousands of dollars. But right now, you have the benefit of having the county enforce that, which is not a bad thing.
Okay.
Free of charge.
Did I hear the beginning of a motion?
I guess, what would the appropriate motion be to table? Well, first we have to decide, do we want to close the record, or would we like to keep it open till
Well,
a
I say-
certain date?
I say we, 12/20 would be the last day for getting,
It's your choice.
Well,
I'm just throwing it out there. It's,
okay, well, I guess we need to close the discussion, I guess.
Yeah, if you're done with the discussion, you don't need to, that's something that's informal, because you already closed the public hearings.
Right, we have done that, so it just,
Deliberations now.
yeah, I would just think that if we were going to table this until the January meeting, the discussion would then come on again, only because we'd have additional information from councils, I guess, as well as from Mr. Wedling, with respect to some of the questions and some of the issues that were raised tonight.
But I think I heard in this that we should close the record of other additional information from public or folks.
Not close, give a date.
Well, give a date, or we can say it's closed tonight.
That's your choice.
Your choice, okay.
Just,
I just recommend that you have a date, either whether it's tonight or a week from now, or it's just so that
Yeah.
people are still going to submit public comment, you can get letters, and it'll be part of the record, but not the record that is being reviewed by on any appeal. Will be the record that your decision is being made on. There's a difference.
I would say that some just got this information from TC Water Sports, and if they close it tonight, then people don't have any opportunity to send responses in once that gets looked over and read. So I would, I guess if it's appropriate, make a motion to table this to the January meeting with the stipulation that all correspondences be received and it's closed as of, close of business day on 12/20/2022. It'd be a week.
Did you have a comment, Claire?
I guess I would, just given the volume of additional information that's been submitted, in fairness to both sides, I would recommend providing a week for,
That's why you said.
okay, is that, okay,
Yeah, and I'm looking at my calendar right now. This- Yeah,
is that,
Today's
okay?
13th.
today's 13th, it'd be the 7
Okay,
days.
perfect, I guess, yep.
Then I
Yeah,
will
20
support your
I
motion.
thought that's what I said anyway.
Okay, you want to repeat your motion, please? That we,
That we table this decision until the January meeting, 10th meeting, with stipulation that all correspondences regarding this issue be in by close of business 12/20/2022.
And that the record then at that point is, the decision-making portion of this is closed at that date.
Right.
As a close of business.
And I will still support that.
okay. All right, let's take a roll call on that one.
Okay. Wolf,
Yes.
Ewan, Gonzalez,
Yes?
Cook,
Yes.
Kivel.
yes.
So I'll be back for one more meeting then.
Okay, there we go. So we will be moving this until the next meeting in January, and all information and additional correspondence or information that we can use will be to us or to the staff by the 20th of December, 5 o'clock. Okay. Thank you very much. All right, on reports.
Who's up? Me?
You are, sir.
Well, we had a meeting last night. Not a whole lot to report on. It was one of our shorter meetings. There was some discussion around some grant applications for the Parks Commission on a couple of projects. We had a presentation by Traverse Connect, and move forward with agreeing to support them financially for a year to help with some planning around the beach district on US 31. And I would say that is probably all we discussed that was of material last night.
Great.
Yeah, pretty
Thank-
straightforward.
Super, thank you. I can report that for the Planning Commission, which is a rare opportunity, we did not have a meeting.
Wow.
Because we did not have any business, which was a very rare situation. The first time since I've been on that board that we've had that situation. However, we did have a special meeting on the 22nd of November, and that was primarily to talk about the master plan, some of the details of that, as well as some of the information on the audit that was done on the ordinances. So that was, and that is beginning, and we should have another meeting coming up 21st of this month, and that's going to actually have the first language that we're going to be looking at with respect to the ordinance redo. So any hints that are given is great, any suggestions are great, and we appreciate that. Okay. All right, we're at that point now that we'll do public comment, and we'll open public comment at 8:40. If there's any public comment, please come up.
Just want to say, Sally Samsel, 1717 US 31 North. I just want to say thank you for being here. Thank you for going through the packet. Good luck finishing the packet. And I apologize that I didn't really take care of all the protocol that I should have this evening. So I'll try to do better. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, seeing nobody else, we'll have close the public at 8:42. Okay. The next meeting that we have will be January 10th, 2023. Preston, is there anything that we should know about that?
There is nothing on the agenda for that date, other than.
Other than, there is now.
Other than this now. But there was nothing else in the wings waiting, no other variances or anything.
Great, thank you. Then we'll just wish everybody out there a happy holiday and enjoy yourselves, and this meeting is adjourned.
Good meeting, Paul, good discussion.